Kansas City rolled over another team this weekend. They beat Angel City 4-2. They've got a league record 9 different goal scorers to start the season. They look particularly formidable at home, which makes sense. That is their fortress. I said casually to some people this weekend, I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't lose a single game at home this year. All right, moving to the world of soccer. Had another really fun weekend of NWSL action. NWSL, for my NWSL sweatshirt. A lot of goals again, a lot of back and forth, very dramatic games that went very long. We'll get into that in a second. Some clear trends emerging. I love seeing, I think I said last week, you can't get too high or too low on the early days of the NWSL season. You're going to see some individual results where you go, what happened? And then over the arc of the season, those get forgotten. But we're seeing a little bit of a shakeup. Things are shaking up. I talked last week about how some of the teams that struggled last year are doing well this year. We're seeing those points kind of underlined in week 3. We're moving into an international break. I'm sure you all know we'll have She Believes coverage next week, but this is a little bit of this moment where you can take a second to breathe and look at the larger landscape of the league. And for example, Kansas City is the only team not to drop any points. They have 9 points out of 3 games, 3 wins in a row. Chicago still has yet to lose a game. They did draw this week, but they have not suffered a loss. We're seeing Portland and Angel City at the bottom of the table. Seems like there's some unrest brewing a little bit with the fan bases of both of those two teams after more struggles this week, particularly Portland. I don't think Portland fans are used to starts like this one. We're seeing a little bit of struggle ball for some of the new expansion teams. 2 losses this week, kind of figuring out what it means to win or compete consistently in the NWSL. And then, hey, we're the late sub. Saw some of those and also saw some very late goals. There's goals in stoppage time, and not just sort of normal amounts of stoppage time. There was a goal in the 8th minute of stoppage time, a goal in the 9th minute of stoppage time, and a goal in the 10th minute of stoppage time in 3 different games this week, influenced by VAR, which I will go on my rant about later. So we saw teams kind of win it, change the game, change the result at the depth, or maybe lose it at the death of a game. So now it's time to do it. We're doing our tier ranking system. New tiers, new week. We're going to start with I think this is the real deal tier, and that's got to start with the Kansas City Current and also the North Carolina Courage. Kansas City rolled over another team this weekend. They beat Angel City 4-2. They've got a league record 9 different goal scorers to start the season. They look particularly formidable at home, which makes sense. That is their fortress. I said casually to some people this weekend, I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't lose a single game at home this year. They're seeing a resurgence from players that they've signed that had some trouble last year with injuries. I think particularly Vanessa DiBernardo looks like the exciting signing that they were so excited about last year before injuries really limited her availability. She's been in vintage form. I'm a big Vanessa DiBernardo fan. I've watched her for years and years in Chicago. When she's got the supporting cast around her in the midfield to let her push as an attacking midfielder, she can change games and she opens things up so much with her passing ability. And she's actually scoring goals too, which is really exciting. But we're also seeing immediate impacts from new signings like Temwa Chawinga, who's just another fantastic showing from her. She got a goal this week. Bia Zanerato out of Brazil. So those striker signings are making an immediate impact. And they're winning these shootout games. It's funny, the anomaly is that 1-0 win that they got in San Diego because their defense really isn't consistent yet. And I think that's probably their main point of interest for improvement. It's good that they can win these shootout wins, though. VAR had some influence in this one. It kind of gave a goal or allowed a goal to stand for Kansas City, took one away from Angel City. But, we saw that 5-4 result at the beginning of the season, this 4-2 result against Angel City. They can match the energy of what the game is giving them, which was a tenet of the team 2 years ago, but not really what we saw last year. And I think the other big storyline for them is that this is Vlatko Andonovski's team, a coach that struggled with the United States and didn't come back into the league with the greatest momentum, let's say, as a manager. But he plays in this league his teams play in this league really well. And what they should be probably excited about is that they're doing it without necessarily playing a ton like a Vlatko Andonovski team, which is good because one of the criticisms of him as a manager for the United States is that he was trying to force things to work that was not paying attention to the personnel that he had available to him and not letting them play to the best of their ability. We're not seeing this in Kansas City. This is a run and gun team. He goes, fine, we'll score 4 or 5 goals a game. That's how we'll win games. He's going to have an emphasis on defense. He's a defensively minded coach. But I think the beauty for Kansas City is to have that balance of how do you tighten up in the back? How do you not let the game get away from you? But how do you also keep that lightning in a bottle in what they're doing in the attack? Because what they're doing in the attack is pretty special right now. North Carolina also continues to impress. I mean, I said last week that I wasn't too worried about their loss, and this week I think that there was a good win. They beat Gotham in sort of a gritty 1-0 performance. I like that they can win a couple of different ways. Sometimes they rely on the attack. Sometimes they rely on the defense. There were just not a lot of chances in this one in general. The move to move Brianna Pinto up front paid off immediately. And it was a good bounce back from, again, not getting the result despite outplaying their opponent last week. So I'm always a big fan of a team that can win in a lot of different ways. In the NWSL, you're going to have games where you play really well, and you're going to have games where you don't play that well, or you find yourself in a bit of a stalemate. And North Carolina getting this result doesn't really change my opinion of them from last week, which is that I think they're really good, and I think they're going to be really good. Moving on to the next tier. This is my wait, don't I know you from somewhere tier? San Diego, Seattle Reign, Angel City, and Racing Louisville. All of these teams are in different spots on the table. They're not like playing the same. They're not playing the same way. They're not playing at the same quality, but they all do just remind me of 2023 versions of themselves. So what I know them from is last year. San Diego, they use purposeful direct play to get a 1-0 win over Seattle, in which the Reign struggled to create any clear-cut chances from their waves of possession. Just very in line with how these two teams usually play. I'm being a little bit reductive, but bear with me. We'll have many, many weeks to get into the granular here. We also saw, Angel City being plagued with some of the same issues since the team's inception, which is a lack of a strong midfield presence to control tempo. This team can counterpunch. They've got really good 1v1 defenders in the back. They've got really good 1v1 attackers up top. Claire Emsley had a great game against Kansas City. They're gamers. They can react, again, sort of positively to the energy around them. And I think we saw that at the end of last season when they made that run to the playoffs. But you need different triggers to be able to pull to be consistent in the NWSL week after week, to consistently feel like you're in a playoff position, to consistently feel like you're contending for trophies. And Angel City, after this offseason, still just feels like a team stuck on the whims of the game state. And again, to their credit, when things aren't going well, they respond very positively to that. But they're still not a team that can walk out and impose their style of play, because without that consistency in the midfield, it's difficult to do. And they're also not relying purely on distribution from the defense up top, because they don't necessarily have those styles of players in the back. They have really, really good 1v1 defenders who are better on the dribble. Actually, like Sarah Gordon is a great player on the dribble pushing forward, but if you don't have outlets for that, that's trickier to utilize. And I am curious if LA fans are starting to feel a frustration with that lack of control year over year after year, because I think that the ambitions for this team are much higher than still kind of being stuck again on the whims of the game state. Racing Louisville jumped out ahead of Portland with a quick brace. It was, I think, the fastest brace in NWSL history by Uchenna Kanu, but they couldn't hold on for the whole game. And they've yet to win a game. They've yet to lose one, to their credit. But Louisville kind of getting stuck in this sort of draw purgatory still just sort of feels to me. I know that Bev Yanez is implementing some of her philosophies onto this team. They're a high pressing team. They're trying to generate turnovers, score goals. But they kind of fell back and defended for a lot of this game after going up 2-0. And eventually that did get to them at the very, very end of stoppage time, which was quite long. And so Louisville, again, it's just about control. They can score. That's a talented team. It's a talented midfield. Actually, I mean, like every line for Louisville has a lot of talent, but how do you turn that into a cohesive unit that can kill a game as easily as they can compete in one? All right, moving on to a less good tier, which is the alarm bells are ringing tier. And It was Houston last week. The dubious distinction this week does go to Portland. It took 9 minutes of second half stoppage time for the Thorns to come back to tie Louisville at home, as mentioned. It was their first point of the season. So they've got 2 losses and 1 tie. I believe that's the longest it's ever taken Portland to get a win in the NWSL regular season. I think in every other previous season, they've gotten at least 1 win in their first 3 games. Mike Norris admitted himself that he might be not getting the starting 11 quite right. Hina Sagita has come into games consistently and made a huge impact for the Thorns. A lot of question marks about why she's not starting these games. They're trying to get this midfield right. They're trying to get this top line right. And it's not they are not able to move the ball and move the ball quickly, but the shape is not necessarily as consistent as it needs to be. You're seeing the midfield get caught on an island. I think we've seen Olivia Moultrie have trouble with spacing, either being too close to goal or too far from goal. We're seeing issues with sort of integrating Jessie Fleming into utilizing her best strengths, which are usually as a ball winner and distributor, turning that into positive play going towards goal. And then consistently, again, we're still seeing the defense have these moments where they sort of shut off, whether mentally or physically, and they're giving in goals. And that was an issue at the end of last season as well. I think that at this point, it's fair to ask if this group of players could be getting better results than they have. I think it's fair to ask if needs were being addressed with off-field signings rather than just sort of trying to put all the best available players together and see what happens. We don't necessarily see clear roles necessarily. And again, getting those sub rotations, getting the starting 11 right. It's just not, the mix isn't quite there yet for Portland. And the question I think beginning to be asked is, do changes need to be made in the front office here? Does there need to be a different set of eyes on the team? Which I don't know. We'll see. I think, I mean, this is kind of like the Houston thing, which we'll get to in a second. Like, you're looking for the positive play to counteract some of the issues. And in the NWSL, that almost always happens. Teams are not just one thing in the NWSL, but I think we just still need to see that proof of concept for Portland from all 3 lines. So they're on a fascinating journey right now, and they've got a while to work on it, which I think is good, though they're going to be hurt by international absences over the international break. The Is Barbara Banda Here Yet tier goes to the Orlando Pride because they are wondering if Barbara Banda is here yet. Hard to judge Orlando. They made this great international splash. Superstar striker going to come in, going to score goals, and they're kind of playing like it. They really should have won this game against Chicago, but they don't have that sort of clinical finisher in yet. They're waiting for Barbara Banda to arrive. I think she's still waiting on a visa. It's hard for me to judge them too harshly, but it'll be interesting to see kind of how long that takes and if that affects the integration of that player into what they're doing. I don't know what's going on here yet, but I'm excited tier goes to the Washington Spirit and the Chicago Red Stars. Chicago gets another result this week. Not exactly emphatic, but Mallory Swanson does get on the score sheet for the first time since her return from injury, which I'm sure the team is very excited about. They get a little bit lucky not to have a defender sent off. They hold on for a 1-1 draw. This is, like, for lack of a better term, kind of the sketchiest result that Chicago's gotten thus far this season, but hey, they got it. And I think, again, you look at a coach like Lauren Donaldson and what he is so good at. He's so good at getting 110% out of a group that's sort of still finding their way. That's a coach that's cooking a little bit, I think. We'll see kind of how things continue, right? But if they start having that upward trajectory of Swanson making an impact in the attack, they're going to steal some points. Going to steal some points from people. Washington got their second win in a row. And the connections on the field from sort of this new group are starting to become a little bit more apparent. Trinity Rodman had her best game of the season thus far. She had 2 assists. You can see that connection with Corey Bethune, who had a goal last week, kind of come together, come into fruition. They're playing really comfortably off the ball. They were playing Utah. They let Utah hold on to the ball quite a bit. They're getting really good at sort of counteracting pressure, which is interesting kind of based on how they would eventually like to play. But I like that they're sort of balancing well this, what is the game asking of us, while also how are we continuing to build these connections so that ultimately, eventually, we can start possessing a little bit more and imposing a little bit more of our own philosophies on the game. And I also just want to shout out Casey Kruger. If you're playing off the ball, if you're having to hold a defensive structure, there is no player you want on your back line more than Casey Kruger. And I thought she was typically excellent. Here's the biggest group, which is the Don't Judge Us by Our Early Days tier, which is Gotham, Houston, Bay FC, and Utah. Again, these teams are kind of scattered all over the table, but this is kind of always going to be a fluctuating group. I think we're going to be having a number of teams sort of in this indecisive group for a couple of weeks. Gotham's injury list is already so long, punctuated by losing Midge Purse for the season this week after it was determined that she tore her ACL against Portland, sending best wishes to Purse. They're this, right, Gotham kind of put together this super team, and suddenly they don't have many of these players available to them because of injury. We've still yet to see Lynn Williams back on the pitch. We've yet to see Rose Lavelle on the pitch. So they're kind of figuring out their style of play while taking some lumps. I do think that Gotham is still doing some interesting things. I think Juan Carlos Amoros is like the most respected madman coach of the NWSL. He's playing Emily Sonnet up a little bit higher. Their point of contention is quite high. It was in a funny way for a team that did not register a single shot on goal. It was a very attacking performance. They want this kind of high line of contention. They want to generate turnovers. I like what Gotham is doing. I do think it's going to work, but I think we talked about this last week, the double-edged sword of kind of picking up all of these players that play so much for their international teams is you're going to have availability issues, and weathering that is also going to be an issue for Gotham. Houston, I don't know if they made a ton of jumps in their kind of tactical sturdiness this week, but they made up for it with a whole lot of heart. They come back to defeat Bay FC 3-2, earn their first win of the season. I do just want to shout out, though, that the tide began to turn when they kind of abandoned the initial game plan. They brought some subs on in the second half. We started really running at Bay FC. They kind of took it to the other team. They started moving the ball quickly. It was a little bit more direct. That's when they start getting these turnovers, start getting motion in front of goal. Fran Alonso is going again. He's going to keep trying probably to implement sort of this system that relies on a heavy midfield presence. Maria Sanchez was playing. She started this game at wingback. They have things that they're wanting to do that aren't quite working, but I do think that, again, if you want to keep developing while also getting results, you make those changes in the second half. You change tempo quickly, and maybe you catch a team on your heels. I really loved seeing that from Houston this week. They play better, I think, when they play direct, but if you're going to keep working on this project, I think the best thing you can do is be completely committed, and we totally saw that from them. On the flip side of that, Bay FC, they have their big home opener, their inaugural home opener this weekend. They have such quality individual attacking talent. Oshwala had another really good game. Rachel Kunananji got her first goal in the NWSL, and that was such a great moment. But the full performances aren't there. They lost the game for the second week in a row in second half stoppage time. This is not unusual for an expansion team. It's the practices that you need as a whole cohesive unit that can help kill a game, can help see a game out. And we're not quite seeing that from the Bay. They didn't quite have as much control once the game got more direct, got stretched. I think once the game kind of got really end to end, that's not the way they want to play. How at the end of a game, when you're tired and you're running on tired legs, can you continue to control tempo? I think that's their big question. But what they don't want to fall into, I think it goes back to maybe their performance in week 1 where they got that close win, which is that you don't want to be talented but soft at the end of a game. And how do you maintain your defensive tenacity while making subs and not get disrupted by a change in tempo by the other team? So I think they've got good problems. They're going to score some of the prettiest goals you've ever seen in your life. And so how do you do that and also keep the other team off the score sheet is for a full 90 plus, 10 minutes here. And I think Utah, likewise, I think they could probably play a little bit more like Chicago. I think that their roster construction is still developing. I think that they're set up to be sort of a gritty off the ball team that moves the ball quickly and tries to hit on the counter. They lost steam as the game went on. They did hold the ball a little bit more than Washington. So what do you do when the other team sort of dares you to create things on your own and stay focused? I think that Utah, has the right ideas, but I think with their roster construction, they are going to have to put performances together that maybe exceed some of that talent level, that collective talent level that we've seen from more established teams in the league, which is pretty normal for an expansion side. And I think Amy Rodriguez is still developing that. But you just don't want to start seeing these results get away from you because maybe the best way to put this is this. Utah is the kind of team that game against Washington, they would have been happy, I think, with a draw. And so it's how do you go from, okay, we liked the way that we played. We liked the way that we got on the score sheet. Our rookies are playing really well. We're really happy with the young talent that we're developing. This is a longer project. This is not a win now team. This is a younger team that we're trying to develop into something impressive, maybe by the end of this season or maybe next season. But how do we do that while also implementing that sort of defensive tenacity that can get us a result out of this rather than dropping all 3 points? Because my whole thing is like C's get degrees. I'm like, draws get degrees in the NWSL. Steal that point. You got to steal that point from people. So yeah, it was another fun weekend. I'm loving these international signings, or the big signings are all showing up, which is exactly what you want. You want your big stars to play like big stars. You want teams to be the games get really exciting when the teams are good in one way and maybe struggle in different ways, and you see those counteracting each other, and you're seeing teams not with complete control, because that can make the games, as maybe chess matches as they might be, a little bit boring. We're probably going to see more of that once we get into midseason, but a really fun new weekend. But the final thing I'm going to talk, and here'll be my final little rant about NWSL, is the other main topic of conversation consistently out of these games this weekend was that VAR is taking too long. One of the downsides of having VAR checking things, whether it's an automatic goal check, every goal gets checked by VAR, or flagging fouls for upgrades to red cards, or a variety of different things that VAR oversees, is that sometimes VAR can become the backseat ref. So maybe a ref sees a penalty and they don't call that penalty, but they go, oh, well, VAR will look at it, so I don't need to call that. I don't need to make a decision because VAR is going to look at that decision anyway. And then suddenly, so a ref doesn't make a decision. They get in their earpiece that VAR is looking at it. They stop play so that VAR can look at the initial play. And then we're seeing a really long gap of time between that happening and the ref even going to the monitor. And a lot of times these were not clear and obvious errors. The camera angles aren't really decisive. So you're having these like 6-7 minute stoppages in play to not make a decision, ultimately to not give a red card or to not call off a goal. And it's making stoppage time very, very long. Like I said, we saw like 10 to 13 minute stoppages in the first and second halves of these games. It's not healthy for athletes to have to essentially play a whole extra half of extra time in every regular season game that they play. Mathematical stoppage time is fine. I think that makes sense. It's correct, but you have to make sure that you're careful about what stoppages you're implementing into the game when you do that. So hopeful that will be something that will be streamlined in the future. But other than that, fantastic week of NWSL.